In this video, you're going to learn the pitching system that our teams have used to close over $100 million in sales across a variety of different offers, everything from B2C, B2B, health, business, all sorts of stuff. So let's get into it. It's called the Pitch Codex. And essentially what we're going to cover is a recap of where we're at in the sales process so you can see where this fits in. What is the Pitch Codex? What is the flow? We're going to break that down into 3 steps. I'm going to give you context on why I do it this way, examples of a good pitch. That'll be the most important and valuable part of this entire video so you can actually see it. So make sure you stay to when we get to that point. And I'm going to tell you how to apply this framework to slides, if you use slides in your demos or presentations, or the Google Doc method, which is a different kind of similar method as slides, but a little bit different you can use as well. Or certainly you could just explain this to somebody on your actual sales calls. So just keep in mind, this is really for complex sales, stuff that's anywhere from 3,000 to 100 grand plus. We've used this system to be able to close it. Okay. So essentially first, let's just cover where we're at in the sales process. So, in the typical sales call, now you might have, 1 call closes, you might have 2 call closes, you might have a 3 call process. Just to kind of make it simple to show you where we're at, in a general 1 to 2 call sales process, you have a couple of parts, right? You have the introduction, where inside of the introduction, you have rapport, you frame the call, set the agenda. You have the information gathering phase, which essentially the information gathering phase, you get their current situation, desired situation, etc. This is not a whole video about that. I have other videos on that on the channel. The transition phase is really exactly what it sounds like. The transition of going from discovery to really setting up your pitch and doing that to where you can basically get the prospect to tell you to pitch them, okay? So it's transitioning to the discovery in a way that really eliminates any sales resistance and also tees up the pitch to be in the right frame. So there's other videos in the channel about that. But here's where we're focused, okay, is the pitch, all right? And with the pitch, there's 3 parts: the promise, the bridge, and the delivery, okay? Not this, just kind of showed up there. But the promise, the bridge, and the delivery. And that's what we're going to be covering in this video. After that, we go to the committing phase. We'll briefly cover that in this video, but we're really just covering the pitch, okay? So again, transition, we already covered that. Pitch, we have the high-level promise, bridge, delivery. Then we go on the committing phase. The committing phase, we'll cover it lightly in this video. There'll be another video on that. But that essentially is where we go through any questions the prospect has or certain frameworks and language we use to do that. Then we go over what's called a temp check, to where we see if they believe, money and everything aside, is this the right thing and is now the right time? And then we go over the next steps in investment. They go on to objections, okay? So that's kind of how it looks in the flow. So I'm going to break all of this down. It's going to seem a little high level at first, but when you get to the example, it's going to make perfect sense, okay? So the first part of this flow is what's going to be called the high level promise, okay? So what is that? It's a 1 to 2 sentence that states the end result, the promise end result, that whatever you're selling is designed to provide, right? So the purpose of this is that it gets clients associated with the result, not the process. It raises certainty, provides tangibility, and what we really want to do is create kind of what's a hard offer, not a soft offer. Okay, so what that means is it's a specific outcome in a specific time frame. Okay, and if you can't do a specific time frame for some reason or a specific outcome, the point is you just want to make it as tangible as possible. All right, so like a good, if I'm selling sales training, I could say, this is all about getting you to 30% closing ratio in 8 weeks, right? So this is valuable. Don't overthink it. I see people way overthink this. It's not like it's the most important part of the pitch ever, okay? But generally, if we can do something like this with our high-level promise, it works. Now, this is very simple. So you can see how this is kind of the scripting of how it's going to look in action. Is, let's say I'm just on an audio call, right, which is not really the norm now. A lot of times you have Zoom. But let's say you're doing Zoom and you're not doing slides, you're not doing any visuals. I'll say, the beginning of my pitch, after the transition would go, gotcha, so you still have that pen and pad? Awesome. So on your pen and pad, write out 1 through 4, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4. Then I literally watch them and I wait until they do it, okay? And then I say, okay, great. Well, let me preface this by saying everything we do is all customized, really, for the client, what's best for you. For you specifically, it's going to be 4 things, okay? 4 things to take you from current situation to desired situation in time frame, or current situation to desired situation while benefits / and or removing objection, okay? So I'll give you some examples of what that looks like. That's the basic kind of template, all right? So you'll see what a good example looks like in just a second. Then we move on to the bridge, okay? This is the most important part. And this is really 3 to 5, preferably 3 to 4 pillars or steps that basically logically take your prospect from current situation to desired situation, okay? So, I mean, on every sales call and every purchase, somebody is in a current state and they're trying to get to a desired state, right? There's a point A and a point B, all right? So the high-level promise is basically saying up front, hey, this is all about getting you to what you want, which they already told you during discovery. Point B, right? Desired situation. The bridge is kind of the high-level how we're going to get there. And it's sort of the milestones from current to desired, the major milestones, all right? So I'll give you some examples later so you can understand what I'm saying. But basically, the key elements of this is to build a logical step-by-step process that gets your prospect saying that this makes perfect sense. Now, here's what's really good if you can pull this off, because a lot of people do a framework like this. Very few people do what I'm about to suggest to you, is you want to make these pillars the simultaneous explanation of why everything they tried in the past has failed and why this is going to be different. Okay, so I'll give you an example. If I'm selling, I don't personally believe in this, but let's say I'm selling the ketogenic diet, and my big belief on my sales call is that the ketogenic diet is the best, most effective way to be able to lose weight, get in shape, and et cetera, fill in whatever the desired result is. So in my pillars, by the nature of explaining to them, I'm going to explain why whatever they're doing right now, which might be eating carbs, and eating sugars and whatever, why that is the thing, that's the problem-based mechanism, why that is the thing that's really holding them back and keeping them stuck, and why the ketogenic diet essentially alleviates that root cause problem, and how it's different and how that leads to certain benefits of that. So if that makes sense, essentially by the nature of me explaining the ketogenic diet, I also explain why they've been stuck in the past. I'll give you a different example. Is let's say it's a business thing and you're selling ads training, okay? And oftentimes what I teach clients who do this is the first pillar is around their offer or their messaging, okay? Because and this is true, if your offer is not right, or you're not even, if it's not packaged the right way, or you don't have the right messaging, all right? No matter what you do with ads, no matter what platform it is, no matter what strategy you use, if the offer's not right, it's not going to work. So oftentimes, if you're somebody who does paid advertising consulting, for instance, you're going to get a lot of people on the call who have tried stuff in the past and it hasn't worked, and it's really because of their offer. It's not because of the paid media strategies. So if your first pillar is the offer, by the nature of explaining what you're going to be implementing with them there, you're also going to explain why, hey, you know how you tried those things in the past and it didn't work? It's because that company you worked with never did anything to address your offer. And here's why that's so important. So the first thing that we do when we come in is we address that, so yada, yada, yada. Again, I'll give you an example a little bit later, but the key is the pitch should be educational. By the time you're done explaining it, they should understand why what they tried in the past has not worked and why this is going to be different. A lot of times with your prospects, it's going to be very, very similar, but a lot of it's all customized. That's why you got to be a good salesperson and actually have understanding of your market and the solution and all of that stuff. It's used to build certainty and future pace the prospect, right? So it eliminates the fear of success. So what I mean by this, and this goes along with the future pacing, is essentially generally, if I have 4 pillars, the first 2 is going to be what they really need, okay? 3 and 4 is going to be stuff, it's going to be solving problems that are now the next constraint by the nature of fixing those first 2 things. Okay, but it's not the immediate need of what they need now. Now, what's key is by explaining those, I'm kind of future pacing the prospect through having their initial problems already fixed. And a big thing that holds people back is the fear of success. So if I have pillar 3 and pillar 4 being the solutions to the problems they're going to face if they're successful, I eliminate that fear of success. Okay, now with these pillar names, a big common mistake is people use super fancy names. My black box XYZ method, okay? Don't do that. That just sounds like BS. Generally, what I like is stuff that's like 1 or 2 words. And if you can use 1 or 2 words and it sounds different or it sounds unique, that's great, but it's not really necessary. Like the 4-step process in and within itself, that is the unique mechanism. And really what is truly the unique mechanism and what's really going to differentiate yourself is that simultaneous explanation of why everything they've done in the past has failed and why this is going to be different. So you're not going to do it with a phrase. Your prospect's not, just use common sense. Your prospect's probably not, unless you have an amazing idea, going to hear a phrase and be like, oh, okay, here's my credit card. All right. Really what you're doing is, and this is the benefit of being on a sales call opposed to writing a VSL or in marketing, you're going to have the opportunity to really explain to them through dialogue, okay, why what you're doing is unique, different, superior than everything they tried in the past, and also by the nature of that, why what they tried in the past doesn't work, okay? So I'll give you some examples. Is like for our B2B, we have sales systems, recruiting pipeline, then we call it, it's actually just called ramp up, and then usually management and leadership. See, these are very simple names. None of this is like new or different or whatever, but the whole process in and within itself is kind of the mechanism, but it doesn't sound fancy, right? But usually, and you'll see when we get to the example, usually what I do by the nature of explaining these things, I explain the cost of not having it, and if I can tie in also why they might have failed in the past and how this is going to be different, so I can kind of educate them on maybe why when they got a sales rep in the past it didn't work, I'm going to do that, okay? So another one is like Pitch Codex, sales process breakdown, pipeline and follow-up ascension. Okay, so like Pitch Codex is kind of a fancy name, but aside from that, it's pretty basic. All right, so here's what your typical bridge is going to sound like. All right, now I'm going to give you like a formula. In general, almost always, the formula is something you follow loosely, not rigidly. If you try to follow it rigidly, it's just not going to sound good. So you kind of want to see what I'm doing here and do it, but do it in a way that sounds natural in dialogue. So it kind of works to script it out first, like in the formula, and then sort of change it to where like what makes sense when I'm actually explaining it to somebody on the phone. But you're going to get what I'm saying. There's different ways you can do this. Here's the most common one I recommend to clients is, look, when it comes to desired outcome, okay, when it comes to losing weight and keeping it off, whatever it is, here's the problem. Most people out there, right, so most people in the market, most marketers out there, most people trying to lose weight, okay, most people out there in the market, they make mistake, right? Or they do incorrect behavior. And because of that, they end up having problem and ultimately the consequences of that problem. So what we do is your delivery, the pillar, like whatever this is, the feature, which allows you to benefit and ultimately benefit. Does that make sense? They're going to say, yes. Cool. What are your thoughts on that? All right. And this is where you create the dialogue. Because, if you say, does that make sense? Everybody's going to say yes. To really see if like they actually get it and it's sinking in and if they agree with it, because a sales call is really a process of stacking agreements. Okay. So to really see if they get that and that agreement is solidified, we have to ask a question like this. Now, I don't do this on every pillar. I usually only do it on the first two. Okay. Because those are the most important. Okay. Another thing you could throw in is you could throw in like a customized line like this. So you feel like based on what we were talking about earlier, when you mentioned blank, that this part of the process will be able to help you with that, right? So you can use stuff to tie in their language as well. And to be honest, this is just a formula, and I like this because it's something you can just script out beforehand. But what's even better is you could tie in a lot of the things they said previously on the call. So you could say, hey, so how on earlier the call you were mentioning you were doing mistake, and that was leading to these problems? Well, yeah, here's ultimately the problem with that, what people do. It's very common. So what we do instead is, and then you go on to the rest of it. So if you can tie in some stuff that they're doing, even better. So I'm going to outline some key points of this, and then you're going to see an example in a second. But number one, it's using both us versus them frames and new versus old frames, right? So you can see, hey, most people out there, they make this mistake, and that leads to these problems. So instead, see us versus them, what we do. And so both of those are us versus new, old versus them, right? I'm doing both. The thing that really helps is this problem linking and benefit linking. So the easiest way to really add value to anything that you do is explain the problem with not having it, or the problem that most of the market is making out there that makes this necessary. All right. So problem linking goes problem, reason why that problem is a problem, and the ultimate cost that it gives you, okay? Then what we do on the invert is benefit linking. So instead, what we do is feature which allows you to benefit, then ultimately benefit of the benefit. Now, if you try to, you want to do a lot of problem linking and benefit linking. If you try to do it super rigidly, okay, it's going to sound weird. You need to find a way to directionally do this and make it sound conversational. That's very key, okay? Now, also, remember how we were talking about the simultaneous explanation of why everything they tried in the past has failed and why this is going to be different. So you see how by the nature of explaining this, they also understand why whatever they were doing, why the current behavior they're doing is not working and why this is going to be different. So it educates them and gives them insight on, number one, why they're stuck, and number two, why this is going to be different. So it's educational by nature. So you've probably heard 100 times, like insight selling, and the key is the challenger sale and making the prospect think differently. This is kind of how that takes form, okay? So this is what we're really trying to do here. I already mentioned, incorporate a lot of discovery if you can. You know how earlier you were saying this, like if you can do that, that's even better. Like if you could use their language, that takes us to another level. It's just hard to kind of formulaically script out. And I find that clients, it's easier to have a canned one and then use their language when it's available. What we want to do here as well is add in some proof if it warrants it. So you can add, there's so many different types of proof: reason why proof, living proof, social proof. So for example, living proof is like, I've actually done this myself, right? So you can say, after you say all of this, you can say, does that make sense? Cool. So for example, like to give you an example of how this works, and then you could tell a personal story. Or you could use social proof, which is like you could essentially tell a client case study story. Or what you could do is use an analogy. So it's kind of like, and then you can use an analogy to drive that point home. That just takes it to another level if you want to do that. I wouldn't do that for every pillar, but maybe on some of the ones that are harder sells, you can do it that way. And then like I mentioned, we already do the double tie down. We do, does that make sense? And then what are your thoughts on that? Okay. So I already said this, but you want to get directionally sound with this. All right. You don't want to just try to be a robot and just try to script this out and then say it formulaically. It's going to be, you're going to be like, oh, this doesn't work. Well, yeah, because you're being weird. You got to be conversational. It should sound natural, but this is stuff you should be naturally doing throughout the conversation. So to give you an example of how this might look, I might say, look, when it comes to give an example of like the ads consultant one, it's like when it comes to getting ads to work for coaches, okay, most people out there, they're focused on the media buying strategies, right? Like what targeting do I use? What are the right settings in the ads manager, et cetera? And because of that, what happens is they never really fix the root cause. And ultimately they spend, 10, 20, 30 grand on ads that never work out and then just write off that Facebook ads don't work for their business. Okay. So what we do, what's a little bit different, is we actually address the root cause first, because essentially what it really is it's your offer, not necessarily what your business is and what you're selling, but how you're communicating that and packaging it to the marketplace. Because we have to make sure that messaging is right, number one. And number two, the economics is right. If the messaging is not right, you're never going to have something that's unique, different, superior than anything else. So ads aren't going to work. And because you're the same as everything else, you get commoditized down, because literally you can only compete on price. That's it. And if you're commoditized down, you never have the right economics, which is not able to actually get your ads to work and to be actually turn a ROAS. Okay. So what we do instead is we focus on the offer first, which allows you to, number one, have something that's differentiated. And number two, have the proper economics so you have the right foundation to get ads to work before you even do it. Otherwise, it's never going to work, okay? So I just made that up completely on the spot. And you see how like I kind of directionally followed this, but it was a little bit horrific. But really what I was doing is I'm really explaining, okay, here's what happens when you don't have this and why having this is so important. If I can just say anything, it's like that phrase. Here's why not having this is so important. And when you have it, here's why it is important to you. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. So then the next section is we're going to move on to delivery. I'm going to explain this out as a visual. All right? So you do have to, tell them what they get. Okay? But the idea of the pillars is the pillars are not like one-on-one coaching. The pillars are like the milestones of what we're going to get done. All right. So the delivery, we don't want to, so the delivery is where we're actually going to tell them what they get, like one-on-one coaching, a done-for-you service, what are the elements of the done-for-you service, etc. I find it's best to just list out all of these things and then communicate them to the prospect as a visual so they can actually visualize themselves going through the journey. And this dimensionalizes the actual pitch. This is very, very key. And man, it really, really, really helps, because a lot of times these pillars are going to sound really good, and then your deliverables might seem very small compared to the pillars. And if you can kind of dimensionalize it out and create a visual for it, like I'm going to teach you, much better, okay? Then we go on to the committing phase. That's going to be a separate video. So a couple reasons why we do it this way. Then we're going to get into the example. Most pitches, they're like vague overviews of what the service is, all right? Doesn't work. A lot of them are highly focused on deliverables. Yeah, we're going to meet this amount of times a week. We're going to do this. We're going to, it's just very, you're going to get this amount of group coaching calls. You're going to get a course. We're going to meet this amount of times a week. We're going to do this service. And it's just like very boring and very commoditized. Like there's nothing that helps you dimensionalize it or differentiate it, okay? And then there's a lot of things that are like, this is a very common mistake I see with agencies, is they know how to do a webinar, and then so they try to do their sales pitch as like a webinar, okay? And there's nothing wrong with using a deck, but you don't want to make it like a VSL or like a webinar, okay? You need to make it, you basically do the framework I'm going to teach you, and then you just transfer it to slides. I'll show you how that looks later, okay? So what we're really going for with this method is clarity, so they really see exactly how they're getting from point A to point B, certainty, okay? So that like, especially when you're explaining the methodology and you nail that simultaneous explanation aspect, it's going to build the certainty. Differentiation, right? Same thing. And another big thing is dialogue. So like, as I explain these pillars, I'm always going to say, does that make sense? Cool. What are your thoughts on that? Does that make sense? Or, okay, do you get that? Okay, based on what we talked about earlier when you mentioned X, Y, and Z, do you feel like this is going to be able to help you? Okay, well, why though? And so what I want to do is what a lot of salespeople do is they're like, okay, you ready for me to explain everything? And then they just go on like a 10-minute tear of everything that the entire pitch. And then after that, they're like, what questions do you have? People say, okay, well, I'm going to get everything. Hold your questions to the end. We call that the anvil drop or overcooking the pitch. It's like where you just, eventually it's like seeing a bad slides presentation. Their eyes glaze over and they're like, ugh, it just, they don't get it, right? So to really get it to sink in to the prospect, what you really need is to, you say a little bit and then you check in. You have a little conversation about it. You say a little bit, you check in, you have a little bit of conversation about it, okay? A good rule of thumb is every 45 seconds to 90 seconds tops, you need to kind of like hopefully have an exchange, right? Whether that's just a tie down, does that make sense? Or even better, just a little bit of dialogue. That's very, very key. If you amble drop the pitch, oftentimes you get and you'll know you're doing this because you'll get this sounds good. Can you send everything over to me so I can, make a decision? If you get that doesn't always mean you're messing up the pitch, but a lot of times it's because they're like, I don't really understand what this guy said, so I'm going to have you send me everything, and now off the call, I'm going to try to understand it because you're incompetent, all right? That's generally why that works. Hey guys, we'll get back to the training in a second. Quick reminder though, if you need sales reps, no matter what industry that you're in, whether it's setters, closers, or sales managers, click the link in the description, book a call. We'd love to talk to you about that in our recruiting services. Also, if you need sales consulting to build out your sales process, sales infrastructure, really set the foundations to really have a marketing and sales process that allows you to scale, also book a call. We'll talk about that. Now, back to the video. Moving on, let's get to the example. This is going to be really what kind of cements it in, all right? So I'm going to start with the transition so you can see what it looks like before, and then we're going to go into the pitch. So again, where we're starting is right here with the basic transition, all right? So I'll end the discovery by saying, look, so I don't feel like I have any more questions. Is there anything else you feel like we haven't covered that you feel like I need to know? They're going to say, oh, no, I feel like you have a pretty good grasp on my situation. Okay, great. Well, John, based on what you told me, we can definitely help. And then what you're going to do here is you're going to insert some thoughts, okay? I'll tell you what that means in a second. So you say that, and then you say, gotcha. So that said, where do you want to go from here? I can pretty much walk you through exactly how we would work together A to Z if you would like, but where do you want to go? Okay? So what I do here is this is like the pass off to control. I'm basically going to get them to tell me, okay, I'm ready for the pitch, right? I'm ready for you to tell me how you work. Okay, a lot of people just hop right into it. It's a little rocky. What I do is, where do you want to go from here? This is like question. What I call this is question, suggestion, question. Okay? Question. Where do you want to go from here? Suggestion. I can walk you through the process of A to Z of how it works if you would like. Question. But you tell me where you want to go. Right? That's really a statement. Now, don't be, this works really great. You could use it for anything. It's like you ask a question, you make a suggestion, you ask a question. They're going to take the suggestion every single time. Now, if you ask it like a complete pansy, well, where do you want to go from here? You know, I can walk you through it if you want to, but will you tell me where you want to go? Okay, yeah, I mean, they're going to be like, hey, dude, just tell me the price. You know, it's like, I mean, at that stage, no, but you need to have some authority when you do this part of the call, and it'll land really well, and they'll be like, yeah, man, walk me through everything A to Z. Okay, perfect. Now, back to the thoughts. It can be a case study story, personal story, or some valuable insight on the what, not the how. So, you know, hey, John, based on what you told me, we can definitely help. So for instance, you know, you actually remind me a lot about a client X, Y, and Z. They came in, they did this, and in this time frame, they got this result, right? That's a great thing you could do. You could also tell the personal story, your personal story, or company story, okay? You could stack those and do both. What a lot of times my team will do is they will give the insight on the what, not the how. So they'll outline like the 2, 3, 4 biggest key opportunities that business has to scale, and then kind of stack that in there with a couple of case studies. And then after they kind of have a little dialogue there, right? Tie downs and dialogue. Then they'll go to, great, that said, where do you think I should go from here? I can walk you through the entire process A to Z, but you tell me where you want to go. Okay? So that's the transition. Very, very basic. Then the pitch is, we already covered this. Gotcha. Still have that pen and pad. Great. On the pen and pad, write out 1 through 4 with some good space in between. 1, 2, 3, 4. You wait till they've done it. Okay? You literally wait. Now, a lot of times, what I'll teach you later is how to do this with slides in a Google Doc. So in that case, you're not going to have to do this. But if it's a phone call or just face-to-face Zoom, you want them to write all of this stuff out. You don't want to just tell them. You need to have something down that's like a visual. Okay? And then you say, okay, great. So let me preface this by saying everything we do is all customized for the client. For you specifically, it's going to be 4 things. 4 things for you to recruit and hire a sales team so you can get off those calls and scale revenue to $250K a month, right? So this is the high-level promise. What I'm doing here is I'm just going to feed back to them whatever is the main desired result that they told me on the call. Okay, that's it. And a lot of times you kind of have to piece it together, right? Like they probably didn't tell you, get on the call and tell you, hey, I need to recruit and hire 2 reps and scale to $250K a month. They might say, hey, I need 2 reps. Our goal is 250. So you kind of got to piece together their desired situation through multiple things, but then you feed it back to them in one good sentence. Now, don't overthink it. You don't got to get it perfect. Just you feed back to them what they want. Use common sense. It's not complicated, okay? And you say, cool. Okay, great. So the first thing we're to cover with you is sales systems, okay? Sales systems, all right? Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to explain this, and then I'm going to kind of just read it, and then we'll break it down. So I'll say, look, so to give you context, there's 2 parts to a winning sales team. There's number 1, the people, number 2, the vehicle. Okay, so the people is your sales talent. The vehicle is the talent, is a system that the talent is operating within. Both are equally important. So think about it like winning a race. You can put the best Formula 1 driver in the world in a Honda Civic, he's still going to come in last place, right? You have to have a great driver and a great car. The problem with most business owners is they get super focused on the talent alone, which, you know, look, we're a talent business. So that is important, but it's only 50%. And the issue is a great sales vehicle is really what in the first place allows you to attract the great talent to begin with, okay? And the reason's obvious. The best salespeople want to go to the best offers. They want to go to the best companies, the companies where they can make the most money, they're the most supported, and have the most success. And that all comes down to your sales systems. So despite that, many companies neglect this, which not only prevents them from getting good reps, but then if they do get a good rep, the rep's like, okay, this company doesn't have it together, and they churn. So with all that in mind, the question becomes, what makes a great sales vehicle? Well, really, and then I break down this. Now, I don't go into a whole long explanation explaining all this stuff. I just kind of list it out real quick, okay? So this is only like 20 seconds, but we're going to skip it for now, okay? So I'll be like that. So then I end off by saying, so that's the first thing we'll make sure is dialed with you. Then we'll go on to number 2. Does that make sense? Cool. What questions do you have on that, if anything? Okay. Now, quick thing on this thing. If you say any questions on that, they're going to say no. If you say, what questions do you have on that specifically? It's a direct command, and they will literally give you questions most times. So do not say any questions on that. Say, what questions do you have on that? I know that sounds like the most basic thing ever. Believe me, that makes a profound difference. I've tested that myself. Say what questions, not any questions, okay? And because what you're wanting to do here is you're wanting to create dialogue. Any sort of uncertainty, any sort of lack of clarity, any sort of misunderstanding, from now to the very end of the call and the close, we need to always bring that stuff to the surface as much as we can so we can really cement, I think about them like building blocks. We can really cement these building blocks in, okay? Now, what did I do here? Did I follow that one formula perfectly? No. But really, the first thing we need to do with clients is work on their sales systems and kind of like their underlying infrastructure, which the deliverables of that is basically just this. Now, if I just went in and explained all of this stuff, it lacks the context of knowing why all of this is important, right? So what I do here is I kind of take this little paragraph or several paragraphs to sort of tee up why this is important. Why is it important, and what happens when you don't have it? Those are the two questions I have to answer before I give the deliverables. Does that make sense? Okay? So, does it follow the formula perfectly? No. Is it I can tell you this because this is what we say on sales calls. Does it come off conversationally? Do people like it? Do they get it? Yes. All right? So you see how this works. Now, let's move on. So after I'm done with that, we have a little dialogue. I'll say, cool. So you good on that? You ready for number 2? Perfect. The second thing I want you to write down is recruiting pipeline. Okay? Recruiting pipeline. And then they write it down. All right? So the way I like to explain this is the biggest cost in building your sales team is going to be having a mishire in sales. Okay? So for example, let's say your product's 10 grand. Okay? And then you hire a new salesperson, you give them 100 new calls to test out. Right? 100 times 10K, that's $1 million in pipeline you're staking on somebody that you're simply just hoping is going to work out. Right? Well, when you consider the average sales churn is 25 to 33%, that's several $100,000 you're going to lose by hire just by the nature of building a sales team. Like that just comes with the territory. Okay? So what we do is strive for 10% lower churn with our clients, which as you could see would save millions of dollars over time after you're hiring sales rep upon sales rep upon sales rep. All right? So the way we do that, okay, so you get what I'm doing so far. This was the tee up. And I could have done a little, and I just wrote this out right before this call, but I could have extended on this a little bit and actually showed them, like, look, so, if this person on this $1 million worth of pipeline, if they're supposed to close 30%, but they only close 10, that's a third of the revenue. They were only brought in 100 grand. You missed out on 200 grand. If that happens 30% of the time, that would be what's 200 divided by, it's about 67,000 you're missing out per hire because your churn is 30%. So our goal was to get that down to 10. That would have been a little bit better. But you see what I'm doing here? This is the cost of not having good recruiting, is high churn and the costs that come with that. So I'm explaining what happens when you don't have this, which tees up why it's important. Does that make sense? I'm doing it again. Okay? It's just framing. All right? So we do that through helping clients find sales reps that fit 3 distinct qualities: specialized knowledge, industry acumen, and buy-in. Specialized knowledge means they actually know how to do what you're hiring them for. They have experience. Industry acumen means they can speak the language of your prospects. So for instance, if you have a car sales guy who has tons of experience sell a hormonal weight loss offer for women, he can't speak the language of that market because he doesn't know the market. He probably doesn't care about the market. He can't resonate with the market. But if you have a woman who's had that issue, also has sales experience, she checks 2 out of those 3 boxes. The third box is buy-in. Buy into the mission, vision, and values. That's always non-negotiable. So the way this works is we have a database of over 200K salespeople, additionally 16 full-time recruiters that poach great salespeople and make them better offers on behalf of our clients. And between both that and our inbound sources, we'll do about 400, 800 interviews a month on behalf of our clients. Then we serve you the best 3 to 5 candidates in 3 to 5 days on a silver platter. Okay, if it's a specialized search, maybe it's going to take a little bit longer. 80% of our clients hire on the first batch, the remaining usually on the second batch. Does that make sense? Cool. What questions do you have on that? All right, so you see how I did that. All I do here, tee it up, what's the cost of not doing this properly? Here's the deliverable. And then, here I'm kind of explaining some benefits along with how it works. It doesn't follow the formula perfectly, but it's directionally sound. All right. And then I get the tie downs and I create dialogue. I'm going to do the same for pillars 3 and 4. Usually what I do is, look, it is kind of weird if after every pillar you're like, what questions do you have on that? So you kind of got to vary, what thoughts do you have on that? Like, thoughts, questions, like you got to vary your language there. And what I usually only do is I just kind of get 2 stronger tie downs on the first 2. Then I'll do 3 and 4 with lighter ones and kind of breeze through it a little bit more because, again, usually for the way you should structure this, your first and second pillar should be really what they need right now. 3 and 4 should be fixing the problems that are going to happen once you fix those first 2 things, okay? And it's kind of the more future-pacing aspect. So as I said already, ours is ramp up and sales management and scaling as our pillars 3 and 4. It's really structured very, very similar way. And then now after we're done with this, I get a quick tie down. Then I move on to what's called the delivery map, okay? You could just say, okay, well, here's how it works. We give you these things. These are the deliverables. I find this is a lot better. I list out all the deliverables, and then I kind of put them within a timeline that we're working with the client. So in this case, I'll zoom in on this. Basically, I'll say, so here's kind of how the flow of how we work together. You're going to have an onboarding call. On the onboarding call, these things are going to happen. Then we move to this, and then simultaneously we move to this. And then at this stage, these things happen. This stage, these things happen. This stage, these things happen. And then I go over here, I explain this. And what's nice is I'm explaining the deliverables and the timeline and the workflow and all of that stuff with the prospect here. But I'm also, I can kind of dimensionalize these things with benefits. So I can add in a little bit of storytelling here and there. Like, hey, for instance, a client found this part really possible. So instead of just a boring list of deliverables, I'm explaining the deliverables. I'm kind of incorporating so they can see how the pillars take place within the time frame. And then I'm able to add in some stories all while doing it with a visual. Okay. So I've found this is very, very key. I'm not going to, go through all of it right now, but I found just create something like this. It's common sense, right? Now, this is kind of a bonus. It's going to be a second video, but that covers the pitch. So we're done. All right. Then we move on to the committing phase, which I want to cover in this video because in isolation, it's not going to have as much power. It's really important for you to understand how this relates to the context of the pitch, okay? So the committing phase, what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, great. Well, that sums up everything. Now, in terms of the delivery map, that visual I just went over with you, and those 4 pillars specifically, what questions do you have, okay? Now, this is usually where, since now they have all the information, you're going to start to get a lot more questions, okay? Now, what you want to do here is, in general, okay, so you depending on what question they ask, number 1, here's the framework. You need to clarify what they're asking. Now, if what they're asking is common sense, you don't have to clarify it. But almost, about 50% of the time, I'd say, you want to clarify that you know what the actual question is. Then you want to answer it, and then you want to lead. I'll show you what that looks like, okay? So let's say you sell a coaching program and your coaching program is one-on-one, but there's group elements to it, right? They might ask a question, hey, is this group coaching? Okay? So instead of saying, oh yeah, we do group coaching, which is the answer, you say, well, there's elements of what we do that are community-based or have a group, but is there a specific reason you're asking that question? Okay? That's this step. That's clarify. All right? So they ask that question, is this group coaching? You clarify what they're actually trying to ask. And you say, the easiest one is to kind of say something, hey, there's elements of what we do that are like that, but is there a specific reason why you're asking that question? Now, what this does is it finds the real question. So then they might say, oh, well, I did group coaching in the past. I hated it. There was 150 people on these calls. There was only 2 a week. I had to, wait 3 hours to get my question answered. So basically I had no support whatsoever. Oh, well, that's terrible. So obviously we don't do anything that's like that. You're going to be working one-on-one with your account manager, but there's elements that you can go to support calls, but those calls might only have 5 to 10 people on them. Does that make sense? So that's the answer. Then I say, great question. What other questions do you have? That's also very key. Okay. So, couple things. We want to clarify what they're actually asking, because sometimes in that group coaching example, that's the perfect example of You don't know what the real concern is that's by the question. You want to find the question behind the question. Then what we want to do is we want to answer it, and the answer needs to be short, okay? Anywhere from 1 word to 2 sentences, all right? Usually there's no need to go longer than that, very rarely. What a lot of salespeople will do is they'll just start talking and overselling. And they're like selling. And it's like, dude, just answer the question, stop selling. And that breaks trust. Very, very common, okay? Clarify, answer, and then you lead. Great question. What else? What are the questions? That's also very key, because if you just do these 2 steps and you just answer the question, you pause, they ask another question, you pause, they ask another question, they pause, you ask another question. The issue with that is over time, that will shift your dynamic, because up until this point, you've been leading, if you've been doing everything correctly, and you're in control, okay? Once you start answering their questions, the person who asked the questions is in control. So what's going to happen is you will lose control of the call. This little phrase at the end, great question, what else, what other questions do you have? Great question, what else, what other questions do you have? Repeat that again and again and again, and eventually they'll say, no questions. And then that passes it back to you, and you can lead it to the next step properly, okay? That's just very, very key. Otherwise, a lot of times, you kind of lose control of the call. Like a great example of this is where you're answering questions, and then eventually they're like, gotcha, so can I get all of this in this document? Yes. Can you send this over to an email? Yes. Is this the best number to reach you at? Yes. Awesome, I have everything I need, I'll talk to you later. And so like you can kind of like, boom, like just, it's like you fall off the ledge. So this prevents you from doing that, and it keeps you in control. I know that sounds very nuanced and like, it's not a big deal. It is a big deal, okay? So again, clarify, answer, lead. Sometimes with clarifying, I might just repeat the question. Okay, just so I'm understanding correctly, you're asking blank, right? So just so I'm like, one for us that's common is, okay, just so I understand the question asking, you're asking me, what's the compensation structure you're going to need to pay your new salespeople? Okay, great. It's bam. And usually once you re-ask the question, it makes the answer very short and very clear. Okay? Now, once they say, that's it, no other questions, then you move on to the next step and you say, gotcha. So how do you feel about the process specifically? Like, do you feel like these 4 things, money and everything aside, do you feel like these 4 things is what you need to insert outcome? Okay? And you have to ask it very directly. Not, gotcha, if you feel good about the process, you feel good. It's like, gotcha. So obviously we're going to cover all the nuts and bolts next step, investment in a second, but money and everything aside, based on what we covered with these 4 steps and really your pathway, do you feel like that's what you need to get the blank? Very directly, very like good brevity, just right in their face, okay? Because what you're looking for here is, are they bought in, money and everything aside, are they bought in that this is the right thing, now is the right time? Like what I really want to do, ideally, is when I drop the price, I want to make it so the only thing that is left is that I got to figure out is logistics. Like they're sold. Doesn't mean they're paying me, but they're sold that they want to do it. Money and everything aside, they want to do it, right? Because once I drop the price, the hardest thing to figure out at that point is if they're not certain that this is going to be the right thing they need to do to move forward. If they're not certain about that, it's hard to build that certainty at that point because they're kind of trying to get out the call. They're trying to get a few questions answered. It's hard to circle back and get them resold. You can do it, and believe me, you'll have to do it sometimes. But ideally, I want them 100% sold. Like, dude, I want to do this. This sounds perfect before I even drop the price. All right? So this is how I do it. I say, how do you feel about the process specifically? Like, do you feel like these 4 things, money and everything aside, these 4 things that we laid out is what you need to be able to scale your business to $100,000 a month or whatever it is? Okay? Now, essentially, there's different responses you can get here. You want to look for, number 1, what they say, and number 2, how they say it. Obviously, if they say no for any reason, or I don't know, then you want to say, okay, great. Well, what's keeping you from being less than 100% certain that this is really what you need to be able to get there? Because I know it is, but I'm curious what's kind of the blind spot or the gap for you. Because maybe I didn't cover everything directly, right? So then you try to isolate it. So if they say, obviously, no, I mean, you want to find the objection, handle the objection, okay? Now, what's more likely is either they'll say yes, and there's 2 types of yeses. They'll be like, the what you're looking for is, oh, dude, definitely. Like, I can definitely see how this is different. Like, this is the 100% what we need. So it's really just a matter of how, if and how we're going to make this work, right? That's like a check the box, you can move on. Like, good tonality, like you feel it, there's energy behind it, etc. Now, if you get like a, I think so, right? That's like a fake yeah. Or if you get like a, yeah, you know, that doesn't count, right? That doesn't check the box and move on. So if I get like a, I think so, I'll be like, gotcha, I think so. Like, what's really going on? Like, what's coming up for you right now? So you see how, like, I'll just call it out. And then usually at that stage, they'll be honest with me, right? And especially, you know, one of the things is you want to call out things you're seeing on the call. And it's not in the challenging and like you're berating somebody and you're intimidated. It's not like that at all. The frame I always take on calls is we are going to have an extremely honest conversation. Like, one of my highest values in communication in general is just honesty and just transparency and communication. So I just want to make sure we're on the same page and we're being honest with each other. Doesn't mean you have to do this. Doesn't mean you don't have to do this. My only goal is to really figure out where you're at and to be honest. Okay. When I take that kind of frame, I'm not necessarily going to say that, but when that's my energy, what happens is like that kind of veil of like this, like not, I don't want to call it dishonesty, but just not necessarily bringing everything out in the open. It goes away. Okay. So then if you call it out, they're going to bring up an objection. You can handle that objection. You retie it. Okay, so you feel good. You feel like this is what you need. Okay, great. Let's work into the next steps. Then you drop the price, etc. So, couple things, and this is very key. Let's say you want to transition this to a Google Doc pitch, right? So one of the things you could do on your sales calls is you can bring up a Google Doc. You could take notes on it. And then when you get to the pitching section, you can write out the pitch live with them. I like to do this a lot. It allows you to customize the pitch really well on the fly. It gives them a really well and good visual. You're essentially taking the notes for them. So this is definitely better than just talking, all right? So we'll just write it out for them. So like in this example, this is like our pitch written out, right? So basically like we would write out, it's kind of like, you know, we're not writing out a bunch of stuff. It's just like little bullets to kind of overview the deliverables. But the explanation is still going to be very dimensionalized. I'm talking about the cost of not having it, etc. Same thing with recruiting, ramp up, and all of that stuff, right? So you can do it that way. The other way you can do it, and this is probably my favorite way, is through visuals, okay? So you bring up a slide deck, and this isn't like a webinar. It's really just transfer the script into visuals, and it's just going to be a couple, like I have 8 slides here, okay? So here I have the sales systems, people in vehicle, all of that stuff. And then this is, see, this one's the recruiting pipeline. And so here's basically how it works. But here is the whole tee up, if you remember, of explaining like the importance of it and what you lose and what are the costs are if it goes wrong. Okay. So that this is the tee up, this is the deliverable, right? For ramp up, this is the tee up, this is the deliverable. For management, I kind of have it all in one, right? And then I have the visual. So that's a way you can do it as well that works really well. A few common pitfalls, then we'll end off. The tactics don't matter more than the fundamental principles. Again, it's not about fancy names, the script, the staying super rigid with everything. The main thing is being very directionally sound with this and giving them 100% clarity and certainty of how to get from point A to point B, okay? If you sound scripted, like, again, people get real nerded out with the stuff that I'm teaching, but if you sound scripted, it doesn't work, okay? Like, you need to have it sound natural. Generally what happens is I recommend scripting this all out, doing, even if you have a big sales team, take a few calls and do this yourself and you'll realize, oh man, this is like way too wordy, way too scripted. And then what you can do is you can kind of essentially modify it until it's a little bit better. And then, you know, once you get it right, what you want to do is drill it into your brain so that you know, if you have something up on the computer and you're like reading it as you're talking to the person, that's not good. Like you need to memorize this and burn it into your brain so it's like second nature. Like think about if you're an actor, like you memorize a script, okay? It's the same thing. And then again, a lot of people overcomplicate it. Don't overcomplicate it. Don't make it clunky. Don't make it scripted. Keep it simple. Simplicity is the ultimate form of sophistication. That's it for this training, guys. We'll see you later.